It was in London that I had my first HIV test. You know, they stripped me naked in a corridor and all those sorts of things. It was just ridiculous. I was a disease or a potential disease that needed to be dealt with. That's what I felt.
You know, the test result took weeks. People were literally falling through the door with quite advanced AIDS-defining conditions. Everyone was terrified. You know, is this going to be a death sentence?
My ex-partner was working on the door at the Oxford Hotel, and I said to him, I just found out I'm HIV positive. And he said, welcome to the club. We started to live our lives like it was our last day, I guess.
Welcome back to History Lab's Darlinghurst's AIDS crisis. I'm Regina Botros. In episode 1, we moved through the vibrant streets of Darlinghurst with our fingers on the pulse points that powered the gaybourhood. From Green Park to City Gym, the Sydney Star Observer and the Paddington Town Hall.
Darlinghurst is where I wanted to be. Are you pumping into?
And we met some of the people living, loving and dancing in Darlow.
Speedos, yeah. I took mine off. I was hoping to win.
The party is here.
As well as our poster boy, Peter Vincent.
Peter Vincent, an entrant in last year's Mr. Gay Sydney, turns heads anywhere.
And now we dive deep into the 80s as the tide of illness rises. At the end of 1985 in New South Wales, there were around 1,200 reported cases of HIV, with 120 of AIDS. Many of these were in and around Darlow. Homophobia was escalating and fear was mounting. Come with us as we move well and truly into the heart of Darlinghurst and deep into the epidemic that swept through these streets, with historian Leigh Boucher.
There was a lot of scientific uncertainty about HIV and AIDS, and this lasted well into the 1980s. At first, doctors didn't know if contracting HIV meant a patient would progress to having AIDS. Sexual practices were under constant discussion, and treatment protocols were constantly developing and changing. Some were even predicting a cure within a couple of years, while others thought the virus might never be defeated. This atmosphere of uncertainty, plus a resurgence of really nasty homophobia, meant a lot of misinformation was spreading in the wider Australian context. The Star, that little gay newspaper in Darlinghurst, was determined to do better.
Gary Dunn moved to Darlinghurst from Adelaide and wrote for the Sydney Star Observer.
Papers like the Star, particularly the Star Observer in Sydney, that was where you got accurate information. And the one thing that editors had to do, if they did nothing else, was make sure that everything they published about HIV was double-checked and accurate, because the Sydney Morning Herald wasn't, the Telegraph certainly wasn't, the Australian certainly wasn't. There was a real responsibility. Did we get that right? Did we cover that properly? Have we given... Because people made decisions about what's okay.
When HIV first began to spread in Darlinghurst, people had no way of knowing whether they'd contracted it. A person might be HIV positive for many years before they experienced any AIDS-related symptoms. In medical terms, you had the virus when you seroconverted or developed HIV antibodies. So if a current or former partner became sick, you might assume you were carrying the virus, but you wouldn't know. Developing a reliable test quickly became a priority for government and health authorities across the world. And in 1984, The Star ran an article.
The Health Minister has announced $600,000 would be given to fund large-scale testing. A positive antibody test means you have definitely been exposed to the virus, and you are confirmed to have HIV.
Peter arrived in Darlinghurst just as this test became available.
Soon after he arrived, Peter became a well-known fixture on the dance floor at the Shift, as a competitor in Mr. Gay Sydney, and offering helpful tips where he worked at City Gym.
What was it like to move from Auckland seeking queer connection and community, only to land in this febrile and fearful atmosphere? I know Peter died in 1991, but how long did he live with the virus, and when did he take the test? I find it so tempting to imagine Peter and his boyfriend Addie in the doctor's rooms, hearing the news, clutching each other's hands. It's a moment I've read about in so many AIDS memoirs. How does someone who's 25 cope with that? So I asked Tim Vincent, Peter's brother, about Peter's first few years in Sydney. Can you remember how he met Addie?
He would have met Etty through the gym, but when it came to training, they were just the perfect combination. You know, they would turn an eye in front of 30,000 people at Bondi Beach.
Because I think he met Addie, and then Addie went back to South Africa where he wasn't out, and then Addie came back here to kind of meet up with Peter, essentially, is sort of how I understand the story. Does that sound right to you?
That's probably right, because he also flew as a steward for South African Airlines, Etty. He knew when he came back if he was HIV positive, which he didn't test for.
In the early 80s, flight attendants were seen as glamorous global gays who might, sneak a few drugs back or maybe some porn from the US. But when AIDS hit, they were recast as a threat, as possible carriers of this plague. And it seemed to me that Addie was assuming he was HIV positive. So, am I right in understanding that neither of them really got tested?
No, and I think what he relied on was his physical strength and a sense of discipline.
Because I think Addie comes over here in 85, and that's really early on in the years of the epidemic. And you think he was already choosing not to get tested?
Yeah, I do. Either that or he didn't care. He's a very private man.
Peter sounds like he was really steady. He wouldn't have been affected by that. He would have just been Peter's warm self.
He was finally living the life that he always hoped he would, so I think that's right, yeah.
Pierre was a good friend of Peter's.
Atty is from South Africa, right? And he's white South African from a very conservative family. And he met Peter and he fell in love with him and he came down here. It was a big deal. So Atty got it, a flight attendant, like any flight attendant back then was. They were promiscuous back then because no one knew any better. You can't say it's their fault. No one knew better.
It was really important to Pierre that I knew nobody held Addie responsible for Peter's seroconversion.
No one wore condoms.
No, condoms were like fetish, weird fetish stuff.
It was back then like fetish stuff.
I do wonder a little about Addie having seroconverted first. After all, neither of them confirmed their status with a test for a few years. What shocked me more, though, was that neither Peter nor Addie rushed to get a test when it became available. When I came out, getting regular tests was part of what it meant to be gay. But in 1985, a headline on the front page of the Star advised,
"Don't take the test."
It turns out that the story of the test and its place in queer life was a little more complex than I realised.
The attacks, the discrimination, the bigotry that's being whipped up because of the AIDS crisis that we're facing.
When the test became available, the Rand government announced it would make a positive reading a notifiable disease. This meant that anyone who tested positive would be on a list held by the government. Folks were outraged and immediately mobilised to protest.
We're just making our way down Darlinghurst Road.
Gay Waves, a community radio program, was on the street.
For me, the politics of the situation is very important. This ridiculous legislation should never even have been proposed. It's extremely offensive because it's, I think, the most homophobic legislation we've seen.
You're talking about the antibody positive registration legislation?
Yes, the registration legislation. Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Part of my reason for being here is to protest that, and to protest that sort of homophobia.
Gay men had good reason to be worried. They were reading in newspapers about talk of travel bans, of quarantines, and even of the refusal of medical care. This legislation casts new light on Peter and Addie's decision not to get tested. At that stage, there might have even been more risks than benefits to confirming your status.
By 1985, it was apparent that condoms were the answer. The advice from medical authorities was to use them, but condoms just weren't part of gay life. Bruce Carter, who moved to Darlinghurst in his mid-teens.
I worked in needle syringe exchange.
Right.
I worked in HIV and psychiatry, mental health, HIV and drug and alcohol. So always like as a frontline worker. I remember the stuff around safe sex, which is funny because I ended up spending quite a few years working and doing sort of health education stuff with it. Initially, you know, some of us were very skeptical. We were kind of like, is this yet another thing where the state is telling us that, you know, they're going to control us and tell us that we need to do this and we need to do that, you know, and we have to have sex in a certain way. I do remember that and being a little bit cynical.
So you mean being cynical of the kind of safe sex campaigns themselves?
Yeah, very early on.
Yeah.
When it first sort of came up, and I think there was a big meeting, you know, and there would have been stuff in the Star newspaper and things like that. And I think, you know, like the AIDS Action Committee, so what became ACON was formed, and there was the health department started sort of talking about, you know, these guidelines around you got to wear a condom and things like that. And it was just all a bit much.
Mm-hmm. Gay men needed to be convinced to start wearing condoms, and quickly. At ACON, they got to work designing posters and ads to encourage men to put on rubbers. And their approach was direct, cheeky, and full of humour.
Now we've finally got down to the posters which are up against the walls. I'm asking Sister Hyacinth, Mother Inferior, to describe for Gay Wave listeners what the posters actually consist of.
The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence were an irreverent order of nuns in drag. They're at an exhibition for the posters.
It's the wonderful words rubber me, rub bodies and use rubbers. And it's a wonderful portrayal of two gay males, and they are lying together and indulging in a wonderful, joyful practice called frottage, I understand, or frotilium in the Latin. And they're completely unclothed. Isn't it fun?
It does look quite nice. It sort of
makes me want to go out and do it.
ACON wanted to ensure that every gay man had a condom in his pocket, and pretty soon Darlow was awash with free ones.
Sydney, 11th September 1987. More than 5,900 people attended the 1987 Sleazeball at Sydney Showground on 5th of September, with many of them proclaiming it to be the best yet. Over 9,000 condoms were given away during the evening. More than 4,000 of these were given away by a new group of luscious lovelies, the safe sex sluts, who by their comportment and dress gave new definition to the phrase glamorous sensuality.
Lizzie Griggs used to party with a queer crowd and quickly put her hand up to help.
You know, we would be safe sex sluts at the sleazeballs and Mardi Gras.
Did you do a shift as a safe sex slut?
Yes.
Oh, good on you.
Proud to be a safe sex slut. But look, seriously, it was like, you want a free ticket to the... Yes.
Sure.
I'm going to go as a safe sex
I'll hand
slut.
out some condoms, no worries.
That's right. But so much fun. See what I mean?
Sometimes things got even more direct. At a local sauna, there were live sex shows demonstrating just how much fun you could have while practicing safe sex.
It was all very sex positive. And I think that's what we did really well. Being fun and sexy and bold, but do it safely. We don't want to stop having sex. We want sex to be fun and loving. You know.
These sex-positive campaigns that were developed inside the gaybourhood stood in very sharp contrast to those addressed to a national audience. Many listeners will remember this ad from 1987.
At first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS. But now we know every one of us could be devastated by it. The fact is, over 50,000 men, women and children...
In contrast, posters made for and by the community became more, not less, sexy and risque. A series by the artist David McDermott are both stunning and quite arresting.
What Leigh is implying there is that they are very graphic. Pornographic, you could say. Bruce Carter.
Some of those pieces were around, you know, couples who were one partner was positive and the other one was negative. That whole thing around caring really, really came to the fore during those years, how people looked after each other. And that came through in that campaign as well. And they're just really effing gay, like they're just really queer.
Condoms worked. The campaigns to promote them worked. Transmission rates plummeted. The Albion Street Centre in Surrey Hills first opened its doors in February 1985.
I'm here in the waiting room of the Albion Centre in Surrey Hills, so it's just south of Oxford Street. It's a pretty classic sexual health centre waiting room here. I'm a gay man, I've been in a lot of these. Plastic chairs, a few outdated magazines on the table. I can see the Star Observer just there. I'm not sure if these boys realise that they're sitting in the waiting room of Sydney's first specialist HIV and AIDS clinic. It was the first in the gaybourhood to offer the HIV test. So there's been a lot of nervous men waiting in these seats.
Lizzie Griggs.
I was employed from March 85 and then, we had to pull it all together.
So you're in this centre that's kind of putting itself together. It's figuring out how to do what it's doing as it's doing.
Truly, in my interview, she said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, yes." What do you think we're going to be doing? And she said, "Well, we're not sure, but make it up as you go along." And I went, "Oh, this is the job for me."
Yeah, wow.
Fantastic. So everyone got on. And plus we had the hotline, the AIDS hotline. So that was a volunteer service. So you were getting lots of people through, gay, straight, lesbian, all different sorts of careers, no uniforms, and there was a lot of fun.
Queer-run and queer-friendly services were mushrooming all over the neighbourhood. Some of these were volunteer services to care for the sick, like the Community Support Network and Ankali. ACON, born out of that fateful meeting at the Paddington Town Hall, became a central organising point for this work. Because this frontline work was managed and manned from within the gaybourhood, it always had a decidedly queer flavour. Conversations about condoms, fisting, oral sex and sex work echoed around these hallways. It tried to cater to everyone, from party boys to sex workers to IV drug users, which made, at times, for some uncomfortable moments in the waiting rooms.
So Lizzie and her best friend and colleague, Jeffrey, hatched a plan.
We were going to go out and be doing HIV testing and provide condoms and lube and education, counselling, and it was all to be on the sex workers' turf. They dragged the seats out, they put a makeshift sort of beddy thing in and they bolted an old desk. And we used to go to different male parlours and we'd do a drive-through through Premier Lane where a lot of the transgender sex workers were. And then it was launched in the Mardi Gras of 1986. We pioneered this service. At the time, it just seemed like a totally crazy thing to do, but so successful.
While Lizzie and her mates were doing their best to develop practices of education and care that were free from judgment, outside the gaybourhood, homophobic responses to gay men, whether sex workers or not, simmered away. Homophobic violence kicked up in the second half of the decade in response to AIDS.
It did come to a situation in 86 where all of these homophobic so-called vigilantes came in with cricket bats and iron bars and all sorts of stuff. And they started harassing all the boys on the wall because they were saying you're basically passing on AIDS. So we had all the boys run up to the bus for protection. So Jeffrey and I locked everybody on the bus and we snuck around up the street to this restaurant on the corner of Burton. And so we called security. Then we're sneaking back and they were rocking it. We ran to the bus. Jeffrey managed to unlock the door, get into the driver's seat, and I just got my door shut with this guy bashing on the window. And I'm saying to Jeffrey, quick, you got to get us out of here. And he's like fiddling with the keys and whatever. We got a two-way radio and the police were told that they had to give us some level of protection.
Just like Lizzie and Jeffrey were using the AIDS bus to engage sex workers on their own turf and on their own terms, there was also a range of innovative services designed to reach other vulnerable populations in and around Darlow. IV drug users were also one of these risk populations, and doctors at St Vincent's, skirting the edges of the law, began raiding their stock to distribute sterile syringes and needles early in the crisis. It's Leigh, yep.
I'm here behind the counter of an NSP in Sydney's Inner East, which is a needle and syringe program. It's a place where drug users can access sterile equipment, and it's free. I think when people imagine the clients of this service, they assume it's for heroin users. But I know, on those shelves over there, is a set of needles, syringes and barrels for the injection of steroids. These days, the staff behind the desk are well aware of the different profiles of these groups and indeed the different gear they might need. But when the service was designed, it wasn't designed with the steroid boys in mind. Later research that interviewed NSP workers, the men and women behind this desk, revealed that there would often be a gym bunny sheepishly in line behind the heroin user accessing sterile gear.
So I always find that glutes quad.
This makes me wonder about where the gay bodybuilder using steroids fits into this story of the AIDS crisis. Was anyone thinking about the bodybuilder as an IV drug user? And how were they thinking about themselves? So I decided to investigate the use of steroids at the gym. And it turned out Peter was central to this story.
Pierre, Peter's friend, is in the clubs and at the gym.
Peter was really, when he came here, he was working at City Gym and being one of the first gay guys that start working there. He was probably the very first gay man that had access to steroids from the straight people.
So I now know Peter and Pierre were probably both using steroids in the mid-80s, something I'd kind of suspected when I saw their pics. But I'm not sure how widespread it was amongst gay gym goers. So I went to the archive. But this coverage often suggested it was only common amongst competition bodybuilders. This doesn't feel right to me. I can't tell you how many times someone sidled up to me in a club and whispered in my ear, "What are you on, bro?" Or, "Are you on cycle?" So I decided to ask some of our muscle Marys and gym bunnies more directly about steroid use at the gym.
Scott was a regular at the gym.
It was very widespread. I knew everyone knew who did it, where to get it. There was all the trainers that you knew. It was very open. I mean, yeah, because in the change room, that's where I remember the lockers, and the trainers or whoever would bring out a package and the steroids would be there. And so you could get it quite easily.
Frank McCabe, Peter's friend, was also training at the gym.
There was a lot of drugs there. There was sort of both steroids and opiates and all sort of drugs there.
Gay steroid users were clearly early adopters of safe injecting practices, though I suspect they didn't see themselves as IV drug users. That term seems reserved for heroin addicts. This disconnect is really interesting. It was pretty widely shared, and it meant that NSP workers often had to figure out on the fly how to engage with the steroid boys. It just wasn't part of their training. It wasn't how the service was designed. But I'm beginning to wonder about other connections between the response to the AIDS crisis and steroid use. I'm seeing references here and there in the Star about medical trials in the 1990s, where doctors treat the symptoms of AIDS with steroids. They even complain about the bodybuilders from City Gym trying to get onto the trials in order to get free gear.
What is known about anabolic steroids and HIV and AIDS? There may be good reasons to use steroids for the treatment of HIV infection. They might arrest muscle loss and boost the immune system.
I've got a hunch. Might the gym boys have been putting this possibility together much earlier, experimenting on the sly a decade before the doctors did? They were all too aware that starting a cycle of juice could increase body mass and vitality, exactly the things AIDS seemed to destroy.
I can still remember the day where he said to Mum, "Look, Mum, I can still walk." And he did about 3 steps and fell over down the corridors at 17 South.
Leigh's talking with Tim Vincent, Peter Vincent's brother.
How long was Peter sick for at the end? You know, because you've mentioned 45 kilos, there's a kind of few months before then, or did it all happen really quickly?
Really rapidly. It's because AZT was being prescribed.
AZT was an early treatment for AIDS. We'll come back to that.
AZT was totally random. It wiped out everything, not just the bad cells. So I can believe that hastened his demise.
Actually, Taylor Square Clinic, the year after Peter died, started essentially prescribing steroids to help avoid that horrible phrase, AIDS wastage, which I just hate. But, you know, it kind of captures what happens to people's bodies. So, you know, I do wonder if Addie and Peter, you know, through their steroid use, they were essentially treating their HIV.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Pierre Tuma.
Back then, doctors were not giving steroids to anybody. There was no steroids in the HIV scene. It was something we did. We gave them testosterone to boost their immune system and to become more virile and to have a little bit more vitality in their life. It was a good thing. When I met Michael, my last partner, I met him at the gym. He came for a training session. He wanted a personal trainer and told me his story. You know, he was an architect. His partner left him because of HIV. But he broke my heart. It really broke my heart. Anyway, I fell in love with him. You know, and he told me he's HIV. I told him I was HIV positive as well. It's only much later they start giving people testosterone. I gave Michael illegally 4 years of testosterone in his life. And Peter did the same with Atty.
This wasn't just about making these boys feel good. It was an attempt to slow the progress of the virus, to extend their lives. Given the changing landscape of treatments, this could have big consequences. Living longer could mean you were still around if they discovered a cure. In fact, improving quality and length of life was exactly what doctors around the hood were doing for AIDS patients. These boys were doing the same thing, though without any medical oversight. This feels to me like a perfect example of the queerness of the response to the AIDS crisis in and around Darlow. It refused the binary between patient and expert. It's experimental, it's radical, it's anti-hierarchical, and it's at the edges of the law. It's also a story that's fallen through the cracks because of how we understand this term, IV drug user, and also how it was understood at the time. These boys and their, I think, effective experiments have fallen out of view because we tell this story through the figures of the IV drug user, the gay boy, and the sex worker, rather than about the people who might have moved across and between those identity categories.
As the decade unfolded, more and more people were confirming their status, more and more were getting visibly ill, and death rates were beginning to rise. In 1988, news of a new miracle drug reached the hood. It seemed to radically slow the progress of the virus, but side effects were severe and widespread access took a long time. While some people were using steroids to combat the virus, others were turning to music, dancing, and each other. The Gone Wrong Girls were a country music drag act fronted by 2 straight girls, sisters Lizzie and Mary Jane. Lizzie was helping from the testing bus and singing at gigs, often for gay crowds.
I mean, it was all very intersected. When the bus was in the Mardi Gras every year, we'd sit on the roof. And so we'd have to push and get Jeffrey up there somehow. And the last Mardi Gras, he couldn't get up the top. He was inside, you know, on a comfy seat. But, look, we lost Jeffrey in 89. And here he is working and giving all of this amazing support and love and care and information and whatever, the whole time knowing I'm getting sicker. Look, the other doctors at Albion Street, who were all Gone Wrong Girl fans, by the way, and would come to the gigs. Like all that, that's how we intersected as well socially through this stuff.
I wonder if in paying respect to the dead and homage to the community workers, we tell the AIDS story in such a tender and sombre tone that we forget how vital and energised the gaybourhood was.
Sarah Lubowitz.
People think that you would have been depressed. People think that there were lots of tears. Yeah, there was. But the joy and laughter and energy and great times, I've never had that since. The intensity of the whole thing meant that the good times were really good, as well as the bad times. I never remember feeling depressed, and I don't remember many people around. There was too much force happening.
Bruce Carter found connection and nourishment in the clubs and bars of Oxford Street's Golden Mile.
We were like, I'm off duty. It's been really heavy. I've seen this many people die, or this crazy scene. This young queen just slashed up in front of me and nearly died, and da-da-da-da-da. But it's been a shit of a week. Let's go out and party. Let's have fun.
Later, Michael Glynn, former editor of the Sydney Star Observer, who was by then HIV positive, said,
I suspect our grief has been buried in the keep on partying attitude.
Playwright Campion Decent agreed.
The gay and lesbian community like to party, and most people will tell you grief is locked away somewhere within the party.
Some historians describe the intense nightclub and party culture as a way to evade devastation. But this doesn't feel right to me. This seems a really strange way to describe something kind of so connected in space and time. It turns the dance floor into an escape and dancing into a kind of pathological symptom. When I see footage and hear audio from Mardi Gras in those years, as well as the many other parties, it doesn't look pathological. It feels generative and connective. It feels to me like energy being unleashed rather than grief being displaced.
Here's Gayways reviewing the Mardi Gras parade sometime in the late 80s.
Well, Dietmar, you were at the Mardi Gras. What did you think of it?
Oh, I just thought it was absolutely fabulous. Well, I was standing opposite the midnight shift, and I'd like to say that the boys did a very good job dancing around and throwing glitter bombs. And
how many people do you think were there?
About 30,000,
Yeah, 30,000. Well, I was outside in Flinders Street. What a night. The floats were incredible.
Yes. I think the Lesbian Hen and Chicken Fishing Club was just great.
Of course, Hardy wasn't packed chocker, but I think, how many did you say, 7,000?
7 or 8.
Yeah, it was quite spectacular. I think I picked out during the dancing when they had Free Nelson Mandela, which is a song that we always play on this program, and they'd done a special disco mix, and it was just so exciting to be surrounded by thousands of people dancing ecstatically, hearing this Free Nelson Mandela and terrific sound system, and being inundated in different coloured snow which was pouring out of some machine in the ceiling.
Too bad it doesn't happen more often.
Dancing back then was essential, was quintessential. The dance floor was actually the reassurance of the ghetto itself, Darlinghurst, because like you bump into people around the streets in Surrey Hills and Darlinghurst, and they say to you they're going to the dance party, and you bump into them again at the dance party. So, well, hello. You look fresh. I love it.
These bumps on the dance floor and in the neighbourhood feel to me like they're dancing on a boundary between the social and the political, between the exuberant and the serious. The dance floor has echoed through my interviews. It's echoed as a metaphor, a source of reliable joy, a sacred space, and sometimes even a memorial. It's one of the contact points between my life and the queer world Peter so clearly loved. And now, I think its queer energies were actually part of the engine powering the response to the AIDS crisis. When Peter trundled up to the midnight shift on a Saturday, he wasn't burying his head in the sand. He was making connections. He was energising himself and exciting all those around him. And I'm pretty sure the attention felt pretty great as well.
Only 5 weeks before the start of the Gay Games in Vancouver, the excitement is vivid. The training is about to peak and final preparations are in progress. Over 100 athletes comprise Team Sydney. If you have not met your favourite athlete, then come along to the midnight shift at 6 p.m. on July 16th and meet them in the flesh.
So I've got stuff in the press of him like competing in Mr. Gay Sydney and like those competitions. Does that ring any bells to you?
Yes, of course. Yes, I've got photos of it too. He started Mr. Sydney and then he won Mr. New South Wales, which is the same contest I went into. He went for his first ever Gay Games. Gay Games back then were very new. So Pierre went to the second one and he won it. And he won gold medal, yeah.
So I'm going to ask probably what I think might be a tough question. Peter goes off to the Gay Games.
With Addie.
With Addie in 1990, right, in Vancouver, and wins the medal.
As if he knew.
Right.
As if he knew.
What Pierre is suggesting is that perhaps Peter knew that he would die soon. Did Peter, at the peak of his physical fitness, strength, beauty and vitality, believe his life would soon be over? And did his lover Atty know it too?
It's pretty much a love story, it really sad. But it was not the only story like this. There's so many people like us in the gay scene, they lost their loved ones and they felt like it's not worth living anymore.
In our next episode, we move into the 1990s. How does this gaybourhood sustain its queer connection when people are dying every day? If Darlinghurst breaks apart, can it pull itself back together?
I think we're all a bit damaged, but to borrow from kintsugi, kintsugi is this Japanese principle where a broken, I guess initially something like pottery, has become mended with gold. What is a result of the kintsugi produces something which is far more valuable and beautiful than was there before.